Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, the co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Daniel, we have a very special guest today. We know him well. He came to Washington to testify for me at various times and more often than any other individual. I have high regards for Mr. Jim Grant. Jim, thank you for being with us today.
It is a pleasure, Dr. Paul.
Great. Jim has a degree from Indiana University as well as Columbia. He has multiple books out that he's written, a lot of on finances mostly, but he also does history books, which has always fascinated me. He has a book out on John Adams and the Speaker Reed. So he is very, very much involved in journalism. But I first got to know Jim when he was working for Barron's, for Robert Bleiberg. But Jim, you have a great past. We can go on with all the things that you have done and all your views, but we want to get to it. But thank you for being with us today. It's great to have you here.
It is my pleasure, Hon.
Good. But you know, the big thing that goes on, the agitation that goes on constantly, because you get asked these questions, I get asked these questions, and it's the essence of everything monetarily. What's the Fed going to do with the interest rates? You know, are they going to raise them from 0.25 to 0.5 and on again, off again, and innuendos? Markets are moved by billions of dollars just by innuendos and minutes. And you know, you've come down on the side. They're bluffing. They're bluffing. 1 year ago, they did raise them a quarter of a point. But do you still take this position that they're bluffing, or are they going to finally be put in a corner and humiliated that they have to get their credibility back? So, I guess we're going to have to raise interest rates a quarter of a point.
Well, what an excellent introduction to a fine question. I don't think the Fed is bluffing. I think, as they say in Wall Street, I think it missed its market. I think that the Fed dearly would like to lift its little interest rate again. I think that the Fed is all too aware of the difficulties of doing so. It is in the position of like 72 degrees room temperature in our republic. Right. And alas, it cannot do that, it being a central bank with staffed by human beings who can't see into the future, let alone improve it before that future comes to pass. So I think the Fed is on the horns of the dilemma of central planning. It is a central bank engaged effectively in the business of central planning, which business is a dead end.
Jim, I want to ask you a general question about raising interest rates. You know, let's say they're around 0.25% and they double them and they go to 0.5, and that makes the markets very nervous and sometimes they overreact. What is the difference between the significance of going from 0.25 to 0.5 or say 1% and doubling it to 2%? Is it the percentage gain in percentage numbers, or how does that work? Do you have an idea how the market responds to those two different scenarios?
Well, the arithmetic significance of a move from 0.25 to 0.5 is, I guess we could call it doubling, but the absolute difference in those that 1/4 would seem to a sensible layman to be immaterial. What possible difference could it make? I think the difference it makes to the market is a difference of expectation. The market has been living the life of Riley these past 6, 7, 8 years on 0% rates, on a regime of persistent bond buying by the Fed and more recently by the European Central Bank. And it is worrying about suffering withdrawal pangs from this regime of very easy money and rising, Fed-engineered rises in the prices of stocks and bonds. So expectations is one important force in in this mix. Another is the what we call on Wall Street, we call the institution of leverage, or the use of borrowed money to enhance investment returns. You can't make money at very low rates of interest unless you amplify your assets by buying more of them with a margin. And there's a great deal of financial leverage around, enhanced by the very low level of rates. Corporate balance sheets are as leveraged as they've been ever. I'm talking about investment grade or the higher quality corporate balance sheets. So very low interest rates do many things. They encourage people to bring forward spending from the future into the present. They sustain kind of an artificial life support companies that in a regime of normal rates might have gone out of business, and thereby perhaps have opened the way for new people with new money and new ideas. So I think it's not unreasonable that Wall Street fears the end of these rates, not so unreasonable that it reacts to the apparent insignificant prospective change of the Federal Reserve's federal funds rate. We have gotten used to over the past many years over essentially free money for those who are in a position to borrow it. And the end of that, the expected end of that, is in fact a very big deal.
Jim, one of the things about central banking is power and monopolies, because they want control, and it's a historic thing. But right now, there's hints that people might, there's a resistance to, the cash economy. And I think Daniel had a question regarding that.
Yeah, Mr. Grant, your most recent article in the Wall Street Journal was a book review, and it dealt with the issue of the war on cash. And there are so many implications financially, of course, in terms of civil liberties as well. One of the things that we were interested in is the international ramifications of the war on cash. We export tons and tons of cash, and it's how we borrow money. How do you see the international implications if the crackdown on cash continues?
Well, Jen, I think the international implications are not so important as the domestic ones. I mean, it's true that billions upon billions of Ben Franklin's and U.S. grants and Andrew Jackson's are exported every year, and the powers that be worry these units of currency financing illicit activities, terrorism, white slavery, all the rest of it, and perhaps some of that is true. I think that the war on cash, which, by the way, is not a phony war, but a shooting war, the war on cash, has its main consequences domestically. But let's first let me try to explain the reasoning of the economists who mean to drive out very large denomination bills, like specifically the hundreds. The case against the $100 bill is that there are way too many of them in circulation, and the excess in circulation is almost certainly helping people do what they ought not to do. It is a kind of a moral argument. The economists say, well, if you got rid of the Benjamin Franklins, people could not dodge their taxes. They could not conduct business off the books. The Treasury would be the richer for it, and morally we would all be improved. That's the case. And there's something else, too. They say that come the next recession, the Fed will not be able or should not be constrained from stopping to cut interest rates at 0%, but ought to drive them beneath zero. But they can't do that. They can't do that if people would go to cash. Think about it. I mean, let's say your bank says that instead of us paying you the trifling amount of interest on your savings, we will now dun you 1 or 2% a year for the privilege of us warehousing your savings. This cost has been imposed on us by the Fed. We now pass it on to you. That's the proposition. Well, what do? Well, you might rent a safe deposit box and put all your money into 50s, 100s, and perhaps some of Ron Paul's gold, my goal too. And you would count yourself a pretty shrewd investor. Well, the economists want to block that avenue, so you can't do that. They want to force you to submit to the dicta that we're now imagining of the Federal Reserve. They want you to submit peacefully with your hands up to negative rates of interest. The way to do that is to abolish large bills. So I think the consequence now is going to be mainly domestic, not foreign.
Okay. Hey, Jim, I want to put up this for the viewership.
Yes.
This is the
display the product.
I think you'll recognize this. This is your most recent letter, and it's called Grant's Interest Rate Observer, a great journal here that you put out monthly. Now,
twice a month, Ron. Twice a month.
Twice a month.
Twice a month. I'm sorry. In this particular one, I want to call attention to it because I think you're daydreaming and wondering about what things would have been like, if the last presidential race had come out differently and you were the chairman of the Federal Reserve. But you write some interesting things. You write, this is what you would do, much more precise than I do. Some days I'd just say, I'd lock the key and take it away and repeal the Federal Reserve Act. But you're a studious person. And you propose this thing where it's deliberate, about how you're going to do it. But it's mostly through education. You're going to try to teach people about why market rates of interest are important, why sound money is important, why regulations are very bad. And monetary history is important to you. Tell these clowns up there what this is all about, and maybe they will accept our way. But the suggestion you have, I think, is the very best, and that is fire 700 PhDs that are raking in cash by spoon-feeding the Federal Reserve from the university to support this type of monetary policy. I think that is a great idea, but what do you think the odds are that this is going to happen in the near future, or with the people running for president right now? Do you think we're going to have any chance?
Well, I don't want to be a pessimist about this one, but yes, come the millennium, you're president, and very graciously, you pass over many more qualified candidates. And I find myself the chairman of the Fed, and people are astonished, as they might well be at this turn of events, but let us proceed imagining. And what do? Well, I think, we do fire, in fact, 700 PhDs. They're nice people, they are, but they can do better work, I think, at NASA and at the National Oceanographic and Space Administration, and maybe, so National Science Foundation. We'll go where their quantitative skills actually can matter. And in their place, I think what I do, with your permission, of course, we confer on these, I would hire in their place 2 historians, just to make sure that we get both sides of the story. And I think just a little infusion of monetary history would more than take the place of these 700 geniuses that we will redirect. We'll redirect their geniuses into the more constructive pursuits. That's the plan, Ron. And I think you have to begin campaigning for 2020, perhaps soon, because it's not looking good.
Well, Jim, you've accused the Fed, and I agree with you, of course, that they're price fixers. And, of course, when Bretton Woods broke down, not only did they usher in an age where there was a lot more price fixing of money, but they've ushered in an age where, or at that particular time, wage and price controls. But right now, we're wondering where we're going to go. But I wanted to bring up the subject of the morality of money. It is what we have now, especially since 2000 or 1971. Can we be rather blunt about what they're doing? It's immoral. It's fraud. It's deception. It's taxation, and all these kind of things. I know we deal mostly in economic terms, but could we stretch it out and say maybe we could use the word that Bastiat used? It's a bit of plunder for certain individuals at the expense of others.
Well, yes, I could I'll give that sermon. I think, Ron, that George Gilder, a very thoughtful writer about these topics, is out with an essay. I think it's available on the World Wide Web for free. And George says that, we must decide, is money a measuring stick or is it a magic wand? Is it an objective measure of value or is it an instrument of national policy? And it, of course, has become the latter. It has become an instrument of public policy, and it is represented to be a kind of magic wand to manipulate the value of dollars and euros and yen, and good things happen. So they say. We know that they are wrong. I think that the outcome of these policies is in fact immoral. I think that people who implement them are, by and large, well-intended, and I think they have been educated to the point of almost certainly of bafflement, our bafflement, but they have been educated to the point of their own confusion. They truly believe, I think, they truly believe that they can improve the future through manipulation of dollar bills. They don't seem to it doesn't seem to register on them that by taking from the saver to infuse the banks, they are doing something wrong, but they certainly are doing something wrong. I would agree that is in fact immoral.
Mm-hmm. Jim, we need to finish up, but I did want to ask you one more question about where we stand on the credibility of central banking. Because in my 20 or 30 years that I've been involved, it seems like they're on the defensive more than ever before. Before, it used to be they were magic. They created prosperity and got us out of recessions. And yet today, I think there are more, even in the conventional sphere of the investors and all, are starting to think, where is the credibility, this zero interest rates? Do you think they're on their ropes? Do you think this is a sign that there will be a major change in central banking? Or what's your assessment? Do you think they're going to limp along like this for years and years to come? Or is there going to be an end point that we're approaching where something will have to be done?
Well, I think that they are on the defensive. I think that the trouble with monetary economics, what my friend Paul Isaac calls a settled pseudoscience, the trouble with monetary economics is that it doesn't exist in a competitive market environment. It is sustained by the brute power of government through the Federal Reserve. No competition there. The Federal Reserve is this undisruptible institution, and it is sustained in the academies through tenure. And what is wanted is competition from outside. And I think, now that you ask, I think that competition is coming.
Great. Okay, we have to go now, but Jim, I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and also thank you again for all the times that you participated in Washington and trying to spread a message, which I think is so important, because regardless of how we spend the money, I think that you have to understand monetary policy. But thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, you're so welcome, Mark. Thank you.
And I want to thank the audience for being with us today and emphasize the fact that the Federal Reserve is there for precise reasons. One is to finance big government, whether it's the welfare or the warfare state. I don't think there's enough taxation out there. The people wouldn't tolerate it. So this is a deception on the people, and it is a moral issue that is involved. But without the Federal Reserve, so much of the spending and excess of government and abuse of our civil liberties and the wars that we fight and the crisis we have, which is being reflected in today's election. Even though people don't understand exactly what's happened, I think it's the end of the stage, not only of the monetary system and this type of central banking we have, but the end of a Keynesian era where their economic policies are failing, just like the Soviet system failed because socialism fails. Well, our system is failing too. But our guest today, Jim Grant, has been fighting this battle for a long time, and whether it's been at Barron's or doing his own grants report or coming to Washington to help me out the best he can, I think the message is loud and clear that something will come, and hopefully we will have an influence in changing to a sound monetary system, which will include, a system of political freedom, which we need so desperately. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.